This episode is brought to you by Viva Systems. Look, not gonna lie, one of the things I hate the most about clinical research are binders. Binders full of paper, overflowing, taking up so much space. Inevitably, I managed to somehow overfill a binder so that I can't open it to put new paper in it without having to remove a bunch of paper. Maybe that's just me, but either way, there is a better way. Use Viva SiteVault. SiteVault gives research sites one place to work with sponsors. It helps reduce the number of systems and logins used to run clinical trials. Look, more than 4,500 sites are already using SiteVault. More than 400 sponsors are using Viva clinical applications. In fact, 65% of all clinical trials run on Viva. That's a lot of sites, sponsors, and trials. The best part is that SiteVault is completely free for sites to use, so please go check it out. I guarantee it'll make your life so much easier. Go to sites.viva.com today. This episode is also brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site network sponsors, and CROs. Real-Time allows users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, check out the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to Note to File Podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Our guest today is Michelle Shogen. With over 25 years in the clinical research field, Michelle has experienced the clinical trial journey from multiple perspectives: patient, caregiver, site, CRO, and pharma. She's now launched her own company, Innovate in What You Do, LLC, to bring all these together to help others improve their way of working with the user voice included. As the industry works through disruptive nature of flexible, device-enabled, community-focused trials, her years of experience bring value to the multiple players in the ecosystem. Michelle's greatest passion, beyond adrenaline sports, is customer-focused innovation and responding to the voice of patients/participants, sites, and study teams. Please make sure you check out the show notes. Michelle is doing some really cool stuff in terms of helping sites by giving away some workshops. So there's some links in the show notes to sign up for those drawings. Some pretty cool stuff. This week we discussed the complexity of breaking down silos, the downside of sponsors customizing everything, and the importance of making your voice heard. So without further ado, Michelle Shogen. All right. Michelle Shogen, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, very cool. Where are you at?
I am based in Sparta, New Jersey, so Northwest New Jersey on the Eastern Seaboard.
Nice. A lot of pharma up in that area, yeah?
Yeah, lots and lots. That's how I ended up here.
Nice. Well, hey, that's a great segue. I want to hear all about how you ended up there and how you ended up where you are today. So first question out of the gate is always, kind of what brought you into the clinical trial space. And I think it's always interesting to hear the sort of diverse ways people get into the industry. So if you would, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you, into the clinical trial area.
Sure. Happy to share. I think I fell into research like most people seem to fall into research. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot that start out with that path necessarily. And I was working for an internal medicine office as a nurse, and my friend upstairs, she was going different places. And I thought, oh, you went to, Phoenix, Arizona last week. And now in a couple of weeks, you're going to be going to Atlanta, Georgia. And, why are you going to all these different places? And she explained to me that she was going to investigator meetings because they did clinical research upstairs at the GI office. And I said, oh, I want to know more about this. And every now and then she would show up with a new pair of shoes or a bag. And I thought, we make the same amount of money. How are you coming up with these nice things? And again, she says, oh, I'm working on clinical trials. And I said, oh, okay, I need this in my life. Let me hear more. And I found out that at her site, whenever they completed enrollment and if they had a really good audit or something like that, they'd get a little bonus, and she'd use that little bonus to get that nice bag or pair of shoes. And then for the investigator meeting to learn about the clinical trials, she would get to travel these places. So I thought, okay, I want to figure out how to bring this in. And I actually convinced the doctor that I worked for that we should be doing clinical trials, and that it was another way to help the patients, something else we could offer them. It was something that could potentially bring in another revenue stream, and it would be really good for the practice. And so together we had book club, and we ordered all these books about rules and regulations, and we studied, and we met after a long day of work, and we quizzed each other to the point where we felt like we knew what was going on with the world of clinical trials. And then I met with the CRA that was coming in that week to the office upstairs and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in doing something in this space. Can you help us?" And they helped us. And so that's how I fell into it. And it was a great learning experience, and I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, that's some like legit grassroots kind of way to start out. I love that. I mean, that's I think there's still like space for that today, right? I mean, starting from the ground up, getting investigators interested. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really interesting to figure out how to navigate the space to find people willing to give you a chance being a brand new site, especially when you tell them, yeah, we had book club and that's how we learned about running clinical trials. They were like, wait, what? What's happening here? But once we actually did some studies and did a great job, they just started coming. And it was really nice because we were able to offer some things to our patients that we were super close to and loved. And the regular stuff that was out there wasn't helping them. And now they were able to go into these. And you know how it is with trials. They don't always work. That's why we do the trials, to find out, are they going to work? And, is it going to help people? But boy, when it actually helped people, I was like, I know this is where I'm supposed to be. And it felt so good. And I was on the site of things for about 9 years. And I worked in Georgia and I worked in California, both doing that. And I had the roles of a study coordinator. I was also a marketing director and site director and coordinator trainer. So I got to do a lot of cool things on that side. Loved it. Loved it when my patients did super well on the trials. And then I had to move because my ex-husband, his job caused us to move. And someone said, you would be a really good monitor. You should look into being a CRA. And I thought, oh, I guess if I'm having to move anyways, and I absolutely loved working for Dr. Ferrer out in California. So I thought, if I have to leave this job anyways, I might as well look at something else. And I applied at a couple of different places, got offers at all of them, but 2 wanted me to move. And I thought, I just moved. I can't move again. And one of them, which was INC Research, they said, you know what, we'll hire you and you can work from home. And I'm like, done, sold. So I did that for about a year, ended up working on some really great studies, and then had an unusual situation where I had an opportunity to go to Bayer. And that was really wonderful. And I worked at Bayer for 14 years and several different jobs, had a chance to be a CRA, country lead monitor, study lead monitor, regional training and quality manager, which was a super cool role, where I got to look at everything that was happening in the US, Latin America, and Israel and say, okay, based on our audit findings, our inspection results, what are the gaps? What's happening here? Do we need training, or do we need to decomplex something, or like what's the root cause, or how do we make it better? And then from there, I got to go into process excellence because I really wanted to improve the ways we worked. And throughout the whole thing, I kept bringing in the site voice because I was like, you guys, did any of you ever work at a site? Like, do you have any idea how it really is when you get on that side of the fence? So it was a big passion of mine to really bring in the operational burden that we were kind of coming up with sometimes when we created new ways of working, and especially once technology was starting to get added more and more. So that was fun. And then we created an innovation function in 2015, which I got to be part of the team that was trying to figure out, does it make sense to have it or not? And eventually became the head of that function and ran that for 6 years over at Bayer. And now I left Bayer the end of June, opened my own business called Innovate in What You Do, trying to bring all the voices of the different stakeholders in this clinical trial ecosystem to the table so we can maybe do this paradigm shift that we're in better, and with the actual end users in mind throughout the entire process. So maybe we can do it faster. We can get medicine to patients who need it, quicker, maybe even at a lower cost because we can do it more efficiently and with less burden to all the people that are involved. So the patients, the caregivers, the sites, the study team members, the vendor companies, like everybody. So yeah, that's me.
No, I love that. I love that idea. I want to come back and talk. I want to talk a lot about Innovate and what you do, but I want to go back through your history a little bit too. I think it's super interesting. So you were CRC to CRA to Pharma, essentially, right? So sort of all the, or at least a good chunk of the stakeholders, if you will, as they are, now. I think. Did you? First of all, I love when I see that when people have started out at the site level, because I do, to your point, I think there's something that sort of can't be communicated to people unless they've been sort of in the trenches, so to speak, and had to deal with seeing patients and dealing with PIs and managing multiple studies with different sponsors and CROs. And I think that's a sort of unique experience you don't get unless you've done it. I want to ask a couple of questions around that. A, did you find it challenging to sort of make the shift between those different roles or within those different, sort of stakeholders? Or did you feel like it was pretty intuitive just because you had been sort of in the industry for so long?
I think that the transition points actually were rather smooth because I had already been in the space the amount of time I had. If I wouldn't have been on the site side of things for 9 years before I made the leap, and I would have transferred maybe a year in or 2 years in, it might have been much harder. But having been in all the different roles, and especially having been a site director and a marketing director where I had to work directly with pharma and, and securing those different studies that were coming into our sites and securing additional sub-investigators and things, I think it set me up so it was really smooth. I didn't have any issues or anything, but I was so surprised because I had so many assumptions in my head having been on the site side. And then when I got to the sponsor side, especially like CRO, I didn't have a lot of like aha moments, and I was only in that space for a year. But when I got to the sponsor side, I had so many aha moments that I was wrong, and I had misunderstood things, and I placed blame sometimes in places where it wasn't necessarily there, and I also missed placing blame where it was there. So sometimes I was like, oh, it is your fault that this is like this, and other times I was like, oh, sorry for blaming you. But yeah, overall, I think it was a good transition. And I also had the chance, I've been in 2 clinical trials as a patient myself, one when I was 18, another one when I was 22. So it's been quite a bit since I've been in a trial, and nothing with all the technology like it is now. But I've been a caregiver. My dad was in 2 clinical trials. My mom was in one, and I'm currently looking for one for my uncle. So I've been on that side of the fence too. So it's nice. It's like a view all the way around. I tried to get into one for COVID, but apparently because I had COVID before, I didn't qualify for the one I was trying to get into. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting avenue too, just to get that, because to your point, to a lesser degree, but to your point, take a lot of things sort of for granted or make false assumptions, and especially at the site level where you're sort of at the, or at least you feel like at the site level, you're sort of at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, right? And so much is happening in the background that's sort of opaque, like it's not transparent to sites, which I want to kind of dive into because it seems to fit into maybe your mission now and getting all the stakeholders sort of on the same page. But, I think that's interesting. And, I put my 2-year-old in a clinical trial as well. And I was actually shocked by how bad of an experience it was to be part of a clinical trial versus a coordinator thinking that just taking for granted this is how trials work and patients are doing fine. You know what I mean? So I love that. I think that's an invaluable experience to have, and not necessarily a lot of people go to the trouble to actually kind of get that other perspective,
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody who works in the space to try to enroll in a trial if it makes sense for you and your health journey, right? Because it's a really eye-opening experience and something that we can draw from and see, where can we do better and maybe ignite a fire within us to really put forth the effort to make the change too.
Yeah, I tell you what, if you have a bad experience, it'll certainly motivate you. I guess you can be motivated by a good experience too, but either way. So I also want to kind of ask another question: as you've moved through the industry and sort of the various stakeholders again, and this is something I do see from time to time, and I'm always again kind of interested in people who do that, because again I feel like you must have, again, presumably a little bit better perspective than someone who never saw things at the site level. But do you feel as time goes by, do you lose that perspective to some degree? Does your mindset shift in a way to where like you lose touch with your site roots? Because there's been oftentimes I've seen that where I feel that's the case too with people that I'm like, man, you worked at a site, this is not how it works, or that this is a particular challenge for sites. And I'm always sort of perplexed when people have lived it, but still won't acknowledge it to some degree.
I think that it can happen. One of the things I didn't realize when I started working on the pharma side of things is how much we work. When I worked at the site, I went to the site, I did my job, I left the site, and I went home. And unless somebody had a problem after hours, I could detach from work.
Right.
It was done. In pharma, it's not like that. The last 6 to 7 years, I was working on average 60 to 80 hours a week, like nonstop. And when you do that, you get burnt out. You're just so overwhelmed with everything that is on your plate, and you're running this hamster wheel, right? And having to do things. So sometimes it's like your empathy and your connection to other places, they get almost muted a little bit because of the fact you're just trying to stay alive in a manner of speaking, right? You're like, I just want my head above water. I just want to breathe. I call it scuba diving. I was constantly scuba diving. I could breathe, but I was definitely underwater. But with me, I don't know. I think I'm lucky because of the fact I was still able to bring it in. But then you also get to a point where, is it fair for you to speak up for a site? And I had this ethical dilemma of my own constantly. And having been there and having gone through it, I was like always saying, this isn't right, or we could do better, or have you thought of this? But at some point, when you get farther and farther away, you start thinking, has everything changed at a site? Am I speaking up for things that's really not a problem anymore? Is it getting worse of a problem and I don't know about it and I should be speaking up about it? So it was really important. I started bringing in kind of like the site voice network into what I was doing, even at Bayer, because I was like, I don't have the right anymore to talk for the sites after a certain point. The first year or two, I think you clearly still can talk from a site's perspective. But after that, you start thinking, okay, it's not right. So the people that you might be thinking of that you say, why aren't they speaking up for the sites? It might be partly for that as well, because we don't know the longer you're away if it's still relative or not. So that's why it's so important to bring the actual voices in, and why we have to amplify the site voice especially. We've done better now as an industry starting to bring in patient voice, but I think we're letting the site voice kind of trickle away. So we need to bring that back up and amplify it a whole lot more.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And I feel like we're seeing at least lip service to sites. It's hard to tell how sometimes legitimate it is, but at least it being addressed that, because look, sites are the gateway to the patients. Still overwhelmingly. So, again, I've always sort of considered sites and patients in the same sort of bucket in a lot of ways. So, it seems intuitive to, make sure that their voices are heard. But I guess let's segue all this into Innovate and what you do. And I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit about, you talk about, bringing stakeholders together, or maybe helping. Look, there's a lot of gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've already kind of seen how that happens by presumptions that exist, from both sides that are probably, and maybe even in ways we don't fully understand, are really hindering progress, in the greater, clinical trials environment here. So I guess tell us a bit about how you're, trying to address that, or kind of what you're up to. I want to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. So when I was working at Bayer in the innovation function, I was so surprised because innovation was really starting to bridge these silos that happen internally at Bayer, between different departments and things like that. There's research that tells us anytime you have more than 109 people that are working in the same space, you will form a silo. And anybody who thinks they're going to break down silos, it's really organically not possible. So I feel like it's a futile effort if you want to break down a silo. And in order to do that, you would have to lose some of the things that make those silos wonderful and really important, and, their own identity. But with innovation, I saw it bridging it. I saw it bringing people together. I saw it working really well to improve ways of working in there. So I said, you know what? If it works here, I think it can work in the greater ecosystem. We can have it where we can, bring the right people to the table, whether that's a sponsor, a site, a patient, a vendor, anything like this, patient advisory group, I don't care. If we bring them to the table and say, okay, who are the actual users for whatever the solution is, whether that solution is a new clinical trial and it's the study specific protocol we want to talk about, or whether that solution is a new technology that's coming out there or way of working or platform, it doesn't matter. But if we could bring those users early on to kind of think through it and say, hey, how does it fit in our world? Not just how does this one interact? Like usability tests are not the same as user voice. And you could do a user acceptance test where you say, okay, let me try this e-consent, just as an example, and see if it operates the way it's supposed to operate. That's fine, but that's a functionality piece. It doesn't say it fits into the world. Now, if I bring in people from a site and from that technology company that makes e-consent and we put them all together, and the site says, look, I only have 3 exam rooms. I have to have them swap out every however many minutes in order for this site to function. I'm not just doing one study. I don't have a big enough waiting room to be able to have everybody do everything out there even. So how is this supposed to fit into my world? That's the conversation we need to be having. That's the one where we say it could be the most beautiful e-consent in the world. But if you don't have the infrastructure to support it at that location, you have to find out innovative ways to do it. So let's get together. Let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do and use those different innovation methodologies that help us think differently than we normally think in order to come to a solution. And I think that's the exciting part. So for what I do, there's a lot of companies out there that do business consulting. And I do some business consulting. I've been in the space for 25 years. I have seen a lot of things. I've dealt with a lot of things. So that's great. But the special piece, I think, is bringing in those 7 different innovation methodologies and experience running over 200 different workshops, focus groups, user workshops, to the same space as the business consulting, and then really bringing in the right users. That's the sweet spot. And I think that's one thing we need more of out there. And if more companies want to do the same thing, I'm all about it. I'll help you, whatever you need, because we've got to do more. We have to do better. So,
I mean, do you feel like now is like an especially, important time because there are so many vendors that seem to be popping up, like, well-funded and maybe even have, some great tech, but that's only a part of the puzzle, right? And I've been learning this and having conversations with people is that there's a lot of great ideas out there, but unless they actually, do like you say and sort of look at how it fits together as part of the bigger piece, I mean, it's never going to work because you're just adding noise to an already extremely loud room. You know what I mean? So. I mean, do you think it's uniquely an interesting time now, especially with sort of DCT being a big deal, and then again, all these vendors popping up left and right?
Yeah, I think it's a critical time point for us because the fact that we are really changing how we do things by going from a traditional setup that we've had forever with all of the brick and mortar sites and everything happening in the site at the moment to being able to be more flexible and more community based and, have these other options, that it's important that we don't just create another box that everybody has to fit into. We have to really make it flexible. We have to really figure out what's fit for purpose, but also the thing that people don't talk about is what's fit for person. And that's key and critical there. So if we're in this paradigm shift anyways of how we're doing things, it's the best time to invest in really thinking through what we're doing and being smart about it and setting a good foundation for something better. And so many people are coming in right now, and I can tell you, having run an innovation function for a pharma company, you get every vendor in the world. They want time with you. They expect you to meet with 300 vendors a day, so you can hear all of their pitches. But a lot of them are coming in and they have a great idea, but they've never seen all the regulation side of things, or they don't see how this connects to other things in the world that we have to work in. And it's why certain things aren't working. If you look at innovators that are out there in history, like Edison, he gets credit for the light bulb, but he actually didn't invent the light bulb. That didn't happen. What Edison did was he took what somebody else invented, somebody else worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and then he made it where it was actually implementable. That's why he went down in history. So that's what we need to do. We need to take these things that are emerging and coming up. This is a normal part of innovation and growth, but we have to make it where it really will work and it's sustainable and scalable, and people can leverage it in their day-to-day activities without the huge burden that it sometimes will have in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's at least for me, sort of sitting down, at the bottom at the site level, I worry that, we're creating just new silos or new and more silos instead of, again, something that's implemented and well thought out. I think that's a real concern, and that could be, it's already a problem. We talked about all the time how many systems there are, how many different vendors there are to have logins to, and it gets insane. And please tell me it's not going to get worse.
I think it's going to get better. I really do have a good feeling that things are going to be improving. I think people are realizing how everything is starting to fit together now, and we're getting better technology where we can do more biometric type things for logins and those situations. But it's one of those things where things sometimes get worse before they get better. And I think we're already hitting now that where it's kind of crazy and worse right now, but that means that we're getting close to it getting better.
Yeah, I tend to agree, unfortunately. I think it will get worse before it gets better. I don't know if we're quite there at the worst of it yet, but hopefully soon, and we can sort of hit that bounce on the way back up, right? I hope we're close to that inflection point.
Absolutely. And I think I'm inspired right now by the number of people that have reached out already in this first couple of months of opening the business, of saying they want that. They want the user voice. They want to figure out how to do better. Like, they are passionate about it. They really think it can make a difference. So I have a couple pharma companies, I have a few vendor companies, I have a site, I have a patient advocacy, group, all coming to me saying, let's do something here. Let's work together. Let's improve it. So that's really inspiring to see people acknowledging that maybe there's a voice other than theirs that should be considered in this process.
Yeah. I do think probably the companies that will succeed are the ones who take that into consideration the most. And, not unlike you, I run a relatively small set of sites, but even I've had vendors reach out who want to come spend a day on site and see what happens and actually get down to the nitty gritty. Even, I coordinate trials still, but really there's a lot of level that's not out there having these conversations on LinkedIn. They're coordinators doing their jobs all day, and just like you say, when they get off work, they go home and they're done. And they're not the ones that are always really active in these conversations as much as they probably should be, or they need to be reached by some other means, because again, it doesn't do a lot of good to have a bunch of high level managers talking when they don't know what actually happens down in the trenches, so to speak. So no, I love that, and I'm with you. I've been encouraged by seeing, again, at least the sentiment sort of start to shift to want more perspective. So, where do you think the biggest gaps still kind of exist? If you had to, maybe call out some areas, are there specific areas where you would think there needs to be a lot more work done?
I think that the interoperability of all of this technology has to get better, like hands down. The other thing that I think we have to have the discussion around is, we've talked about bring your own device for, ePros or these other things, but what about the sites bringing their own devices to the table too and leveraging the technology they have at site? We're seeing those conversations starting, and different people will push back for different reasons, but I think that's where we're headed. We need to be able to use what we have within our ecosystems, as long as they have to be compliant systems. But if they're a compliant system, why can't they be used? The same thing with a patient's phone or tablet. Why can't it be used if they have it? They're going to know it better. They're going to understand it better and have that flexible or hybrid approach to some of the things that we're doing. And we're going to see much more of that, I think, going forward. So figuring out how to do it and how to do it well is going to be key. And it takes a whole community to figure that out.
Well, and that's been particularly interesting to me lately, and a question I've asked a lot of people, because I'm not going to pretend to understand all the tech side of things necessarily, but it seems like we'll either end up with everyone, well, not everyone, but being able to have some options and then interoperability tying them together, or we would have to see some other sort of consolidation, that we would just have so few platforms that there's whatever, 3 big platforms. Think about like EHR systems. There's not, every clinic isn't doing its own thing. There's only a limited number of EHR platforms that people are using. So I'm curious if things could go the other route and instead sort of end up with fewer but more all-encompassing platforms. Do you think that's a potential, or maybe just a combination of those two things?
So there's pros and cons to that for sure. Having something with a smaller number of options for people to have to learn definitely has the pro of, you're probably better at using it, you're more efficient at using it, less mistakes, all these things, right? The con to it is, once you have somebody, a vendor company or solution provider, I should call them instead of vendor companies, I learned. But you have a solution provider and they know they have this big chunk of the market, the cost of that can go anywhere. Like, you put all your eggs in one basket and they know they have you. And that's even like the DCT approach, trying to say, okay, we have one provider and they do everything. We suck at integrations across the board. I don't know why. I'm still trying to figure out, like, why do we suck so much? But we do. And so having somebody who they have the whole platform seems so much better, because you don't have to worry about the integrations. But then if anything goes wrong, like, you have to just bow down and say, okay, whatever you say goes, whatever you want to charge me goes, whatever timelines you want to give me goes. We lose a lot of the negotiating power. We lose a lot of the financial kind of power there too. So it's a balancing act. It's like, which is the better choice? And I don't know that anybody has that answer yet. You can't figure it out.
Yeah, no, I feel like it depends on what day of the week you ask me as to which I think would be better. Because I'm with you. I think there's some benefit to having competition in the space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for better or worse, every site kind of operates in its own way anyway, right? So I think to some degree, sites value that flexibility, or just ability to do things their own way. But again, the flip side of that is, like, there's an endless number of systems that could be come up with, that could be invented to accomplish essentially the same thing. Surely something's going to win out. But yeah, I also, as you are sort of painting the picture, I hate to see is that, yeah, there's three big vendors who do everything, and then you're kind of stuck paying the price because you got nothing else you can do. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because it seems like there's been a big, maybe I'm wrong, it seems like there's been I don't know the word, I guess, disincentive to get on a big platform. Because even now, a lot of the systems we use at the site level that are provided by the sponsors, they've got everything within them, but it's never utilized. Instead, yeah, Rave also, or Metadata also has all these other things. They have a ePro, they have a IRT, but instead we're using 2 other systems to do those things. And Metadata, we're just using Rave EDC. So, it seems like there's always been a little bit of hesitancy to jump on one platform.
Well, and I think the other piece, one of the things I was surprised by when I came over the pharma side, was how much work they do to qualify a new platform. And so, like with Metadata, just as an example on that one, Bear had its own instance. Like, they Bearized everything. That's what we call it. We Bearized it. We customized it to the point that it's not an off-the-shelf solution anymore. There's so many different things. Anything that gets upgraded, we have to change. So to add something else in, when they come up with these other pieces, became very hard. And we were so far behind on the version of the EDC piece of it, Like to get it up to the right level to be able to leverage these other things, it was going to cost millions of dollars and it was going to take a year. So it was like, does it make more sense to do that? Or does it make more sense to use a different provider that we can just plug and play and go now and it's much cheaper? So that was a part that I'm really surprised. I think as an industry, people are trying to get to more off the shelf solutions now so that we don't have that customization glitch that we've created. Bear's not the only one. I think all the pharma companies were having problems with it, right? But that was really eye-opening to me just to see what it would take to get this new version in.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting phenomenon because I didn't realize, I think, how much this happens until even recently. But like, I've sometimes badmouthed vendors, but I sometimes wonder that it's not the sponsor's fault for asking for all these, customizations that they think might be making it better for them, but are really making, well, sort of watering down what the vendor originally created, or in fact, and sometimes even making it work counter to the way it's supposed to, just because they want that level of customization. So at the site level, you're like, oh, Rave sucks. Well, no, it doesn't. It's built perfectly fine. It's just an example. Again, I'm not saying anything good or bad about Rave, but it's just that in this particular instance, it was, I have to go to a different separate URL that's specific for the sponsor, and it's built differently than all my other instances of Rave are. So, but that's not Rave's fault. They're just, they want to get paid. And probably whoever's paying for it is paying a lot of money for those customizations.
Well, and the funny thing too is some of the customizations clearly helped internally at the pharma company. But some of the customizations was every pharma company wants to be the sponsor of choice for sites. Every pharma company really wants the sites to enjoy working with them and want to work with them and be willing to do trials with them. So some of our customizations were because we said, this is stupid. Like you're asking the site to go to too many different places, or you're asking, this should connect to that, or you should be able to pop from here to there. So some of the customizations I think were with the site in mind, and it made it harder for us. Other things where it would blow my mind because I was like, okay, on this side, you're thinking about the site. On this side, you're clearly not thinking about the site because this is way harder, So it just depends on who's working on that area and how strong their voice is when they're having these things being built too. So yeah, it's really interesting.
So, I mean, what do you think, what's the sort of answer here? I mean, it sounds like you're addressing it in a very practical way in terms of, again, bringing together, because as these things are being built out, what if everybody was sort of weighing in, or what if everybody's perspective was being considered? I mean, ideally, we would end up with a system that works well for everyone. And isn't that in the best interest of the sponsor, who presumably is the payer in this instance? I mean,
yeah.
I know the idea is to make it easier for them, but isn't the irony if they made it easier for everyone else, it would probably be better for them at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot to say for that. And that's one of the reasons why I started the company, because I really do believe that's what we need to do in order to make this better. And by having a large user voice community, which is one of the things that I really need help with. I need people like you to say, okay, I'm willing to have my voice shared. I'm willing to join a call. I'm willing to take a survey. I'm willing to join a workshop, get paid for it, of course. But, but I'm willing to share my voice, not just gripe about it over here, under my breath somewhere where it's not going to do any good. I'm willing to amplify my voice. And whether that is a site, whether it's a vendor company, a sponsor company, because the other thing is, we have breakdowns even with these vendors coming in now. They're not the same old vendors that we've had forever. These are brand new vendors. They're trying to get into the space. They don't fit into our procurement processes that we had forever to vet people. They don't necessarily have the money or the longevity or, have completed as many trials that we're asking for. So we have to fix this on so many different levels, but you have to also do your cost impact mapping for each of these changes that you're doing. And for cost, I don't just mean financial, I mean the burden. How much pressure are you putting on the people that have to interact with this? How much, are you going to make it harder for them to enroll patients or for the patient to participate at all, for that? And then how much impact are you going to get from this change? And is it worth that cost trade-off? Right? So if we're not having those conversations with the actual users, it's a problem because it's just all assumptions and we're making wrong choices. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that's I don't know. I feel like that's been really underappreciated, and we're starting to see it appreciated more. I mean, maybe that's part of the benefit of more competition coming to the market right now, is that, some of them are understanding like, oh, well, maybe we can not make the same mistakes that have been made by some of these older legacy systems that are out there. I mean, I haven't even really considered it this way, because they do seem to be a little more open. I mean, maybe because they have to, because they don't have the experience in the industry. A lot of these people have these tech companies. No one's seen a patient before. No one's ever enrolled a patient in a trial. They've never been at a site. So they have to start relying on some more of these voices.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the only way that we can get better. They used to say it takes a community to raise a child, right? And it's the same thing. I think it takes a community to raise a clinical trial. Like, in order for this to really happen, we all have to kind of get together and be willing to play in the same sandbox and to be open and candid and frank and not be timid about sharing our thoughts, especially when we can really affect the path going forward. So, and that's one of the reasons why I'm trying now to encourage people to have user voice strategies. Like, you should have for your business, I don't care what business it is, you should have a user voice strategy. You should have an idea of who are your users, who do you interact with, and how do you ensure what you're doing makes sense for them and what you need to do to adapt. And the other thing that I'm really encouraging people to do is sign up somewhere. Whether it's with me, whether it's with someplace else, especially for sites. So there's the site advisory group option with SCRS that's out there, and people can be part of that. And some companies will go there. I have a user network that has all kinds of users, like any user, but sites are definitely welcome to join my user network. I don't care where you're going to go to share your voice, just do it. And I'm more than happy to share links to my user network with you. And then I'm also happy to give back to sites by saying I announced at SCRS just here recently that I'm giving away every quarter of every year. I'm going to give away a free virtual innovation workshop for sites, because they can't spend $20,000 to $30,000 for me to do it. Like, maybe these other companies can do. It has to be virtual because I can't travel for it if it's free. But to really help y'all figure out, how do you do this digital transformation? How do you have these conversations about what needs to get improved? Are there things that you can do on site for your own user voice strategy? Are there things that you can do to raise your voice to sponsor or vendor or other companies, And I think if we can do more of this, that's also going to help everybody.
Yeah. No, that's huge. I think especially sites don't, to your point, they're not necessarily swimming in cash to the point to where they can get the kind of help that would help get them over the hump of some of these big changes or implementing new innovations as they come along. So I love that. Where can people find you online, and where can they sign up to be eligible for that?
So if you go to www.innovateandwhatyoudo.com, you'll get to our website, and then you'll see the services tab, and one of those is user voice. And that's where you can sign up to be a user. If you want to be a user voice person, you can be in the network, and we would let you know if things that come up match your areas. And then I can give you the link to enter a drawing for the free innovation workshops for the sites. I can forward that over to you, and maybe you can add it to the podcast comments or something.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to throw all that into our show notes. No question here. And I mean, look, I really think what you're doing is really important. And again, sort of a often underappreciated thing. And the longer the more people I talk to, and the longer I'm in this industry, the more I realize, like, hey, nobody knows what everyone else is doing. Like, we really need to all kind of come together. So, I mean, I want to really encourage people to reach out, talk to Michelle, and talk to each other. Again, I think it's getting better. I do think that especially site level people are starting to come out of their shell a little bit, for better or worse, but at least be vocal. So I love that. And I really want to thank you for coming on today. Anything else before we sign off here?
No, I think just empower people to really take an opportunity to look inward and see what you're doing and how you're interacting with others and in the space, and figure out where you can innovate in what you do.
I love it. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks for having me, Brad. I really appreciate it.
As always, thank you so much for listening to Note to File Podcast. Make sure to check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for episode transcripts, show notes, and our guests' contact information. Thanks again.